Wow, this used to be the Telluride Hospital. That's really cool. Now it's a museum. As I entered the building, there is a room that's called the Origins Room. You cannot film in there, and it's because they want to protect the artifacts that are in there. They've been dated to 1,000 years old, and it's pretty fascinating. But as we move past that, we get to come into a room that is filled with all sorts of Telluride brain wrinkles, and I'm going to show you a few of these. They're absolutely amazing. They have a little storefront set up in here. It is very cool, and they have some interactive displays as well, so let's check it out. Here we learn a little bit more about Butch Cassidy and the Wild Bunch, and we can listen to an audio that actually tells us a little bit more about the Telluride robbery that happened with Butch Cassidy. Most people know Telluride as a mining community, and because of that, there was a lot that came through here. In fact, today earlier, I got to meet one of the first female miners of the entire area. A very, very cool moment for me. She showed me a photo of her in the mine, and it was absolutely spectacular. But here you get to learn a little bit more about what made the mines important and also the businesses of this area. And there are a few interesting features that you'll find. Not only are there interactive elements, but there's also an audio tour which you can purchase up at the front, and each of the stops are marked by a little building that looks like a museum and a number, and that tells you a little bit more about each section you're visiting. Now, Telluride was laid out in 1878, and the town actually started to come together with a group of cross streets and different things that would express different communities within the larger expanse of the area. At one point in time, there were up to 90 businesses here. You can see that those businesses included hardware stores and blacksmith shops, but jewelers, photographic galleries, boot and shoe stores, druggists and groceries, livery stables and feed stores, barbers, baths, paint shops. Also, they had confectionaries, millineries, furniture stores, breweries, laundries, and saloons. Believe it or not, by the turn of the century, there are about 6,000 people living here in Telluride, and that is pretty fascinating. But with all those people and all of the banking, that's where you get the people who came in to do nefarious things. Now, Butch Cassidy and his gang decided to come through and rob the bank. And at the time, they robbed it for about $20,000, which in today's standard is about $500,000. So that should tell you a lot about how much money was coming through Telluride. There's a full timeline of Telluride from 1875 all the way down to 1929. And there are some very interesting things along the way, including this, where the Bank of Telluride President Charles Wagner illegally transferred $500,000 from New York banks to protect the funds of investors in his bank as all of the country started to crash. That's a pretty interesting one. Also, the influenza epidemic killed 10% of the population, and that combined with World War I brought the mining boom to an end in 1918. A pretty fun thing that you learn here at the museum is that Telluride wasn't always called Telluride. It was in fact called Columbia at first, but they changed their name because they didn't want to be mistaken for Columbia, California. That's kind of a fun story. But in this room, you get to find out all sorts of other things, including some of the things you might have found in the town, and I'm going to show you some of those because they're kind of fascinating. Now here we learn about the isolation and the extremes. As you can imagine, being in high altitude, the winters are just really harsh. But that also posed some very unique challenges for this area. At first, supplies and prospectors all arrived from Silverton and Rico by wagon, horse, or foot over the mountain passes. Obviously, this took a while, and it was very treacherous. Even though Telluride was only a few dozen miles away from these places, this could take a really long time. When we move upstairs, we'll learn a little bit more about the railroad, which then made it a little bit easier. This was a community that was very isolated because of the extremes. Even to this day, you'll notice prices are a little bit higher here because it is more remote, but it is beautiful and well worth it. And the harsh, harsh winters paved the way for the beautiful summers, springs, and falls. I appreciate when they have things like this where you can see photos from the past and put together some of the people and the faces They have news articles in this in addition to regular photos and captions for each of these. They have original menus and playbills, all sorts of artifacts from the past. Very, very neat way to keep like up to date with what has been here versus what is here now also. In addition, we learned that Telluride was a town of immigrants. And the reason why is because a lot of those immigrants were coming here from Italy and Germany and Austria, Yugoslavia and Switzerland, and they were trying to make a way for themselves. In fact, more skilled workers even began to flow in from Ireland and Scotland, and they would work the mines because it was a tedious and hard task. So immigrants found this to be a really good way for them to find a job and also a place to settle. As you can imagine, that would mean that there would be different boroughs, so to speak, even in a tiny town. People spoke different languages, communication sometimes was difficult, and it posed some interesting challenges. But that's also why you can see so many different influences in these tiny mountain towns even today, because the immigrants paved the way for that. So as we move into our next room, we get to learn about making the home here in Telluride. Okay, we start off here with the Tomboy Bride cabin and another audio experience. You can see this is a replica of the home that Harriet Fish Backus and her husband George shared in the Savage Bend from 1906 to 1910. And in addition to the audio tour, you can find out who the couple were, what they looked like, a little bit about their past. And in addition, if you would like to find out more, they have a book that you can pick up in the gift shop so that you can learn a little bit more. This is actually one woman's personal account of life in the mining camps of the West. So it is something that she personally wrote. And here you can see what their humble home might have looked like. A small stove, a small chair, some bare necessities, and then they have, of course, up here a Sears and Roebuck catalog so they could order everything that they would need. Despite them having stores and things like that, sometimes the Sears and Roebuck would get you what you really need. You could even order a house from Sears and Roebuck, and I think that that's pretty interesting. Now, in addition, in this room, there is a section that says Child's Play, and childhood was brief in Telluride, and chores began at the age of only 4 years old. Employment started at 10. So a child might have some childlike wonder for a short time using some of these toys or some of these school items, but quickly they were thrust into the workforce. Here's the plot twist. Many of them did not make it to high school because they were thrust into the workforce. So they couldn't continue to do both school and work. And work was more important because it provided for the family. Now again, inside this room, you can see some of the different cooking things and different items that you might find in the home. And unlike the cabin, you see a little bit more of a modernization. And as we move forward, you see that the modernization started to occur as the homes became a little bit more complex. No longer were the cabin facades. Now these are actual sided homes with little porches and nice touches. Do you guys know what this is? Do you? This is a refrigerator, believe it or not. Now, in many of the places I've been to, they did not have refrigeration at all. They would use spring houses. However, here, as time started to go on, they started to modernize, and they were able to have these refrigeration units where they could use a block of ice, and it would just kind of keep everything cool. That's why they called them ice boxes, believe it or not. But that's just, again, one part of this story. There's a lot more here, so let's keep going. This I thought was very interesting because it says in the early 1900s, homemaking required hard labor, adaptability, and innovation. And cleaning was a constant chore because there was so much mud, manure, ice, snow, and pests. And days were quickly filled with cooking, caring for children, washing, sewing, and also minding stoves. Outdoor spaces and gardens were also there, and they required a lot of upkeep as well, and that all came down to the mother, the homemaker, the woman. It's like in so many places, the mother was the backbone of the family. She had to care for everything in the home and provide for the children and make sure everything was good. Without the woman, things would kind of go to shambles. And so the woman was always the strongest person in the family, despite the man being the one who would typically have the hardest job outside of the home. They would have hard labor jobs, including sometimes the kiddos would also have those jobs. This is us here, women at work, with a very real danger in life. Being in the mountains with all the mines around, women frequently outlived their husbands. In many cases, they outlived not only their husbands, but some of their children. And that was a hard thing, because not only would they have to deal with this grief, but also they would have to then find a way to provide for their family. So many times they would have to, in addition to all of the things we talked about with the home, they would also have to find a way to make money to provide. And that was very difficult in a mining community that had a higher male population than female population. Here we see a group of those women and what they might have worn at that time. Life was very different than it is now here in the Telluride area, that's for sure. Now, again, focusing on this area, a lot of those women who had lost their husbands and had to provide for their family would do laundry for either the miners or for wealthy families. Others would turn to being a seamstress or a cook. Some ended up being nannies or housekeepers. Some became school teachers. Others fell on hard times and became prostitutes. No matter how you look at it, life was very, very different back then than it is now. Now you walk along the streets and you see the beautiful homes and the manicured yards and all of the amenities that have been afforded by time. Time allowed people to kind of transition into this period where they're doing these amazing things here now. But it wasn't always so, and so it's important to come to places like this so we can see the humble beginnings. Now, this is the room that has Audrey's story in it, and this began with a wayward drifter, Jim Shane. And you can kind of see him right here. He got the gold fever. He wanted to come out and prospect, so he bought all the tools, and he was ready to do something awesome. But like a lot of people, that wasn't going to be an easy feat. So Jim came to Telluride and he was gung-ho and ready to go. Jim's hope did not work out well. In fact, he was considered soft. He had nice hands, so he played the piano. And he ended up playing the piano in the red light district. And he was inspired while he was there. And that's where the portrait that we're about to see began. Now, Audrey was a person who worked in that district. And as you can see, he was very inspired by Audrey. He wasn't just inspired, he fell in love. And when he fell in love, he wanted to do something beautiful and give her the world. And so he created this portrait. He decided that he was going to sell it. And in selling it, he was able to make enough money where he was going to be able to go and strike it rich. And so ultimately, the story of Audrey is a story of love, but also a story of prosperity in a way. Here you see that over the course of completing the painting, they actually did fall in love, and he sold the painting and then ended up striking gold in Telluride, and he married Audrey. With a successful business in buying and selling profitable claims, they built their life here together until 1936 when they moved to Cortez. So see, sometimes things that happen in the red light district don't necessarily always have to end poorly. The wall, you see these little lanterns. These are considered to be the red lights, and most brothels were situated in a district that was called the red light district or tenderloin district. And this was designated area for the houses of sin, the saloons, and the gambling establishments. In this room, you get to see this beautiful old carved organ. And music has been a popular pastime in Telluride since the very inception. Bands and musical clubs were featured annually during the town's 4th of July and Christmas celebrations. And the cornet band won first prize in the Festival of the Mountain of the Plain 3 years running in 1890. Music is still a big part of Telluride. They host various festivals, all sorts of different programs, and you can hear live music kind of throughout. And I think that that is just absolutely epic, that it all started out with music and sounds and vibrancy, and it's still to this day, even throughout all the changes, it's still very vibrant and still believes in music to such a degree. There are a few other things in this room that I'm going to leave for you that tell a little bit more about the parlors and brothels. I think that you'll really appreciate this. There's some great information also about the fashion and the fabrics that's accompanied by this iconic antique right here. We all moved up to the second floor of the museum. And again, this used to be an old hospital, so there's a little bit of information about each section of Telluride's history. This is very neat. We start off with a good video, and then we'll move around and see some of these delightful collections around us. It begins here with the railroad, and we mentioned previously that the mining community was pretty isolated until the railroad came along, and you can see the rugged landscape. Now the railroad no longer services this area, but at one point in time they had a railroad that came in, and with that all of these amazing pieces that you can find today here in the museum tell the story of that railway. Here we learn about David Wood, which was considered the greatest freighter in the West, and then also Otto Mears, and this was the pathfinder of the San Juans. Both of these had a huge impact on this area. David Woods actually was here in the 1880s, and he was a pioneer to the Telluride area, and he listened for the rattle of the wagons and the crack of the bullwhip to signal the arrival of everything from food and mining, and the wagon covers advertised David Wood, Magnolia Route, and Wood was the chief freighter to Telluride. They had oxen and horses that would pull up the Studebakers from David Wood's group, and these were the only ways that they were getting supplies at first before the trains came along. So that was a really big deal whenever people would see these come into town. They knew things were here. Supplies are present. We can do things now. Then here we have the pathfinder of the San Juans, and this was Russian-born Otto Mears, who wore many mantles, including a soldier, a farmer, a freighter, a miner, a merchant, a capitalist, and later on a politician. But to the settlers of Colorado, his name was synonymous with toll roads and railroads. He brought both of them to the area, and there was a lot of belief that without him, Telluride would not be what it is today. So with those two men, and all of the things that they made possible, and then also the railroad itself, which then made things possible. It brings us into more about mining and how that changed the landscape of everything here, because things were more able to move forward, and how communities were able to turn from these little dust holes into these really nice places. Now here we learn about the ever-present danger that existed in Telluride as miners. In fact, backbreaking and dangerous work was only part of that. You could see here that house fires, because everything was built of wood at one point, was also a real threat, in addition to avalanches, which were absolutely horrific during the winter months. They also had wood cribbings that would cave in, and it was not uncommon for them to have mining disasters, which ultimately would result in death. In fact, that was just the beginning. Winters, the roads were impassable, but work still had to be done, so they had to figure it out. Many of the people would inhale the dusts from below, and that caused lifelong effects which would shorten their lifespan. Cave-ins were regular. This happened very frequently, and because regulations were very different back then, a lot of really horrific things happened, which built a lot of problematic behaviors in people who were just exhausted, tired, angry, frustrated, and they were just trying to make a living wage. And that's where we get to turmoil in Telluride. And there are several things that played into this, but we'll start over here with the high cost of cleanup. It says here that mining came at a price, and there was a trade-off between the benefits of mining and its impact on the environment itself. And in the earliest of days, the hillsides of the upper San Miguel Valley were completely devoid of trees. They needed to be able to supply the mines with the timber and the fuel, so they would just clear cut everything. Now, seeing the beauty and the landscape of Telluride today, you would never know that this was the case, because it is gorgeous. A lot has gone into repairing this environment, but at the time it was just a really rugged, rough looking place, because every tree they would cut down, they would put underground to hold something up so they could dig further. And with that, a beautiful place started to transition into a not so pleasant place to be. And that was just the start of the problems. If you look through the historic photos, you can see what the conditions were during those times. Hard to see from these, but believe it or not, mercury and cyanide were also used in the milling process, and they became toxic to the workers, and people were dealing with all sorts of things, including dead fish, dead plants, and rapid illness. In fact, because of things like this is why we have the Environmental Protection Agency now. They create regulations because these places were completely not safe at all. And because of that, so many people died. And I've been to places where they've had really horrific mining accidents that have caused them to change like child labor laws and things like that, because entire communities were wiped out. All of the men, all of the boys. And that's unfortunately the case with many of the mines. They learned through the process of the bad stuff that would happen, which is what happened here in Telluride. When people started to get very ill, people started to not feel well, people started to see this like really impact every part of their existence, from the food that they could find in the streams to the lack of vegetation for the animals, then they started to have some animosity and some issues. Then in 1893, a combination of panic on Wall Street and also the repeal of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act caused silver prices to go down, down, down. How downstairs we were looking at that timeline and we noticed that the flu wiped out a lot of people, and then World War I wiped out a lot of people, and altogether about 10% of the population just kind of, yeah, that was all part of this. So we've already damaged the environment. We already have people who are dying because of toxins. And then all of these happen, and they took the value of the one thing that they were producing and it went away. Therefore, the money went away. And because of that, people did not know what to do. They had a series of fires that ravaged portions of the downtown area, and in doing so, many people did not come back. They did not rebuild because there wasn't really anything here for them to have. But still, there's more to this story of all of the turmoil. In fact, right here, strikes. This is a very common theme amongst all mining communities, strikes. July 28th, 1896, the Telluride Miners Union, number 63, became a chartered member of the Western Federation of Miners. And in 1901, mine owners introduced the Fathom system, which linked the wages to the amount of ore a miner could extract in a single day. In this change, they were given 8-hour days with $3 a day payment. 3, as you can imagine, even though the standards by which we are paid today is a little bit different, $3 a day. Keep that in mind. It all kind of came to a head on July 3rd of 1901, and at that time, a fight broke out. A fight broke out between the union and non-union people and the scabs, who were the replacement workers. They all got into it, and this altercation turned into something that turned deadly. And needless to say, that did not end well, not only for those people who lost their lives, but for the remainder of the bigger group. In fact, the conflicts got so bad that in November of 1903, the governor of Colorado declared martial law, and they shut down all the saloons, and troops were stationed in the streets, and there was a curfew, and anyone who was anti-unionist formed the Telluride Citizens Alliance and brutally rounded up 60 union men. This roundup, they were held at gunpoint, they were escorted out of town, and they were told to never come back. And the troubles consistently were happening for almost a year thereafter before finally the strike was completely called off with no good resolution. This is not the first place that I've seen that they brought in martial law and went up against the miners. And again, remember, most of these miners are immigrants. They don't have a whole lot to their name, so they don't really have a lot that they can do other than just fight the good fight. But when that fight turned violent, it turned very bad. And again, turmoil here in Telluride. As we look at this model stamp mill, you can see all of the layers of what the mills would have looked like, but also, finishing up our story, unions didn't come back to the Telluride area until almost the 1920s. So for several years, they were non-existent. The 1890s contributed to what they now call Telluride's golden era, and companies purchased and consolidated individual claims and made mining more cost-effective. The arrival of the railroad in 1890 allowed more supplies and ore to be transported in less time, and that same year the first commercial application was filed for the source of mining, and high altitude trams maximized the movement of men and ore from the mines and the mills. You will find a nice collection of various things that they might have found in this area, including pieces of gold. They have gold ore and also some fool's gold or pyrite, but they also have some calcite down here below. And in addition, they have a little information so you can see how exactly they pulled all of the ore out of the earth and some of the equipment that they might have used. Now, as we step into the next gallery, we find innovations, adaptations, and inventions for unique places, unique challenges, unique people, and unique solutions. I really appreciate that in this gallery they talk about the various challenges that they faced, and they show you a challenge and then a solution for each of the things. For example, they mention here that sustainability was a vital part because they have a rare environmental, social, and economic network here. And here you can see some of the scenes from around Telluride and how they have used this balancing act to have solutions for policies, practices, and adaptations that protect and preserve the balance. This, of course, is a far cry from the mining where they stripped down everything. The Telluride of today is more conscious and aware of the environment and the unique challenges that come with it, and protecting and preserving that legacy, but also the place that so many people need because of so many things that the Telluride area provides. This is a ceramic insulator that was used at the Tomboy Power Station, and you can see here what that looks like up close. Typically these are way on up there so we can't see them, but this is huge. Which leads us to our next challenge, which is to operate the mines economically. And the solution was to first have successful long distance transmissions of alternating current AC electricity. Along the way, you see a suspension insulator, petticoat glass insulators, another suspension insulator, and also a wheel bucket. Use of electricity was very helpful because they were able to do a lot of different things with that, and being able to make it more efficient using electricity as opposed to some of the other things that they previously had used in the mines took mining to the next level where it was a bit safer and also where they could be even more productive. They have a working water wheel that you can push the button of, I think. Ooh, there it is. Our next challenge is to move people, goods, and ore over steep, rugged mountain terrain. The solution? Trams and gondolas. Now today here in Telluride, you can ride the first of its kind, a giant gondola that takes you up to Mountain Village, absolutely free. It is amazing, but that was not the gondola system that they were working with back in the day. They were working more so with like a ski lift style gondola, more like the one that you see at the top of Mountain Village that can carry up bikes. That's a much more advanced version, but more similar to that. We enter into our hospital section. And again, I mentioned this previously was the hospital. And so now they have this section to tell us about the history here and what that meant to the community itself. Okay, it says, spin the wheel of misfortune. Congratulations, you survived your dangerous childhood years and are now a 25-year-old male who decided to move to Telluride, Box Canyon, and work in the mines. Can you survive living 1 year? Okay, so we're supposed to spin our wheel and find out what our fate is. Here we go. Oh. The matter is, though, most of these were not good outcomes, but these were the common outcomes. But as you can see up here, that is just the start of it. In fact, death records from 1909 to 1923, 33% died of lung disease, 22% of accidents. Wow, that is slightly different than up here from 1889 to 1896. Pneumonia, accidents unspecified, contagious disease. Oh, some of the other things that they had happen, the Smuggler Union Fire, and that fire, which started at the mouth of Smuggler Union Tunnel in 1901, spread into the mine. There was a mass funeral held for 28 victims, and it was considered to be the longest procession in Telluride. Right here, the Liberty Bell snow slide. That was in February 28th, 1902. It was a massive snowslide that swept away boarding houses and bunk houses, and rescuers were caught in a second slide, and by the time that they had a third slide, 16 men passed away and 10 were injured, and some of them were not recovered until spring because it was just impassable. They also have right here, they have some of the workers from the Liberty Bell mine that were caught in a snowslide in 1902. And then on this side, they had the Cornet Creek flood. Telluride residents were surprised on the July day during their monsoon season in 1914 when they had a surging sludge mass that invaded the town. And you can see by the picture, it's not good. Now, up to 5 feet of sludge came through town, and fortunately in that incident, only 1 person perished. However, can you see now why it was such a hard thing? The climate of Telluride, and the infrastructure was not the same as it is now. And even now, things can happen, but they built up the infrastructure to help with these things and to mitigate these things. Man right here made history in Telluride. The Old Miners Hospital became the center of national attention for a brief moment in 1949 because Dr. George G. Balderson, he was actually the hospital's chief, was the first person in history to remove his own appendix. And he operated on himself in a seated position and did not use mirrors. Right next to Dr. Balderson, you can see some of the medical equipment, some of the ointments, some of the surgical tools, and they have a very nice medical display here with everything having small cards like this to tell you what they are and what they were used for. This right here was the first child born in Telluride in this hospital. And this is Harriet Anna Backus. She was born on September 9th, 1909 on the first floor. And she was the daughter of Harriet Fish Backus, which is the author of The Tomboy Bride from downstairs, that book. Next to the x-ray, you can see a chest x-ray that demonstrates a conglomerate of different really terrible things. In fact, here you can see what miners would call consumption. And that was the biggest threat to the miners from the 19th and 20th century. It was lung disease. So as you can see, there were a lot of challenges, but as those challenges continued, progress was made, and eventually this became a more modern town. Okay guys, it's time for us to go into our last gallery, See You Later, and this is Telluride today. As you'll notice, there are several different interesting things, including this right here. This is from 1970, skis and bindings that were used by Senior Mahoney and Emil Elias, and this is just one set of skis. There's also a video inside. I'm just gonna show you pieces of this and then we'll catch up after. So who was Bill Mahoney? He was Telluride's first mountain manager, and he was drawn to the slopes at a young age, and as early as age 5, guys, he and his brothers tied burlap bags to the skis to make them climb up the slopes. But that was just the beginning, and this room is filled with so much joy. There's a silver medalist in here, there is something called the Speed Queen, and there's even a Colorado Ski Hall of Fame plaque in here. Mention you can sit here and watch the video here. Here is the silver medalist, Gus Kenworthy, and he grew up performing spins, flips, and tricks in Telluride's new terrain park. And you can see here that he is reacting to winning his silver medal. The interesting part is that at the previous month's qualifying Winter X Games, he became the first person ever to land a triple cork on a slope-style event. And you can see clearly the town is very excited to celebrate Gus. He's not alone. There are others from this area who have also participated in the Olympics. In fact, here we have Hagen Kearney, who placed 13th, and Gus Kenworth, who took 12th, and then Keaton McCargo, who placed 8th. Special piece. It's a Nike for Kenworthy, and it's addressed directly to the museum. That's epic. Speed Queen herself is Marty Martin Kuntz. She was a self-taught skier and discovered the sport at age 7 and was instantly hooked. She moved to Colorado as an adult and she competed in the women's pro downhill racing circuit. And this is her right here. The outdoor legacy of Telluride still lives on today with the mountain biking, the skiing, all of the recreation, and so much more. And it's interesting to see how we started out as a dusty little mining community and have turned into something so beautiful and elaborate that so many people enjoy coming to. And I really appreciate that the museum shares all of that with us today. Well guys, that's gonna do it for us here at the museum in Telluride. It was absolutely amazing and definitely a must-see. $9 for the price of admission for an adult, and absolutely so many cool things. From a hospital to a museum and everything in between, I have thoroughly enjoyed coming along here, and I hope you guys have too. It looks like it's just about to start raining, so remember guys, we're not here for a long time, but we are here for a good time, and I'll see you guys later. Bye!